to another journey together. Tonight, we will explore profound insights, whispered down through generations of Zen masters, designed to quiet the restless mind and guide you toward deep, tranquil rest. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm here to share a curated collection of Zen and Buddhist stories, revealing forgotten pathways to inner calm and emotional liberation. Each narrative holds a potent teaching, capable of shifting your relationship with stress, the clamor of endless thoughts, and the ceaseless pursuit of external validation. These aren't merely bedtime tales. They are carefully preserved wisdom, handed down from those who understood a fundamental truth most of us have misplaced: that true peace isn't found by altering our outer world, but by transforming our inner landscape. As the ancient proverb wisely states, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Tonight, these timeless teachings are ready to reveal themselves to you. As we immerse ourselves in these remarkable narratives, you may feel a subtle yet profound shift. The anxious grip of worry may begin to soften. The constant hum of your thoughts may start to recede. You'll find yourself gently easing into a state of profound understanding and peaceful repose. So, settle in deeply now. Let your body release into whatever holds you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, recognize that you are about to receive teachings that have awaited your discovery for a long time. Let us explore a story about the nature of perception and reality. In ancient Japan, during a time when cherry blossoms painted the landscape in delicate pink hues, there lived an empress who had devoted herself deeply to the study of Zen. Her palace, while filled with magnificent treasures, reflected her spiritual pursuits through its simple elegance and peaceful atmosphere. The Empress had commissioned a renowned artist to create a special screen for her private meditation chambers. The artist, understanding the Empress's refined taste and spiritual depth, painted a breathtaking winter landscape. Snow-covered mountains stretched across the silk panels, their peaks touched with pale morning light. A flock of wild geese flew gracefully across the scene, their wings captured mid-flight against a delicate sky that seemed to shimmer with life itself. When the screen was completed, the Empress was absolutely delighted. She would often sit before it during her meditation, finding the scene both beautiful and conducive to contemplation. The painted geese seemed almost alive, as if they might at any moment continue their journey beyond the borders of the silk. One afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered through the palace windows, the Empress was sitting in quiet discussion with the revered Zen master Hogan. Their conversation meandered through various aspects of Dharma and the nature of mind. The peaceful atmosphere was punctuated only by the distant sound of wind chimes and the soft rustle of silk robes. "Master," the Empress said suddenly, her eyes turning toward the beautiful screen, "I have a question that has been puzzling me. In this painting that brings me such joy, where have the geese gone?" Her question hung in the air like incense, carrying deeper meaning than its simple words suggested. She was not asking about the physical painting before them, but probing into something far more profound about the nature of perception, permanence, and reality itself. Where do things truly exist when they are no longer in our immediate view? What is the relationship between the observer and the observed? Master Hogan received her question with the quiet attention that marked all his interactions. He did not rush to offer philosophical explanations or elaborate theoretical frameworks. Instead, he simply raised his hands and clapped them together sharply. Clap! The sudden, crisp sound cut through the peaceful silence like a temple bell. Startled by the unexpected noise, the Empress involuntarily flinched, her composure momentarily shattered by the immediate reality of the present moment. "You see," Master Hogan said with a gentle smile spreading across his weathered face, "they have flown away." In that single instant, understanding dawned in the Empress's mind, like sunrise breaking over mountains. The geese were never truly there on the screen in any ultimate sense, just as the sound of the clap existed nowhere before he created it and nowhere after it faded. Her attachment to the painted image, her conceptual question about their location, dissolved completely in the sudden, undeniable reality of that present moment sound. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the fundamental nature of our perceptual experience and how we create suffering through our attachments to mental constructs. Why do we become so attached to images, ideas, and concepts that we mistake them for reality itself? Zen Buddhism points to our habitual tendency to solidify fluid experiences into fixed mental objects. The Empress's question about where the geese had gone revealed her subtle attachment to the painted birds, as if they possessed some inherent, permanent existence, separate from her perception of them. This same pattern plays out countless times in our daily lives. We become attached to memories of past experiences, treating them as if they still exist somewhere we can return to. We worry about future scenarios as if they already possess concrete reality. We cling to our self-concepts, our roles, our relationships, as if they were solid, unchanging entities rather than dynamic, ever-flowing processes. Consider how often throughout your day you find yourself lost in mental representations rather than present moment reality. You might be physically sitting in a meeting while mentally rehearsing a conversation that happened yesterday. You could be eating dinner while your mind constructs elaborate scenarios about tomorrow's challenges. Like the Empress gazing at painted geese, we often mistake our mental images for the living reality of this moment. Zen Master Dogen taught, "Time is not separate from you, and as you are present, time does not go away." The clap of Master Hogan's hands demonstrates this teaching perfectly. The sound didn't exist in some permanent location waiting to be discovered. It arose spontaneously from conditions, hands meeting, air vibrating, ears receiving, and immediately returned to emptiness. This is how all experiences actually unfold, including our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. The Buddha said, "The past no longer is. The future has not yet come, and the present moment, when looked at with attention, cannot be grasped." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship with experience itself. Rather than trying to capture and hold on to moments like painted geese on a screen, we can learn to participate fully in the flowing, dynamic nature of reality. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called bright attention, a quality of awareness that meets each moment freshly without the filter of conceptual overlay. When we hear a bird singing, we don't need to analyze where the song goes when it ends. When we taste food, we don't wonder where the flavor resides between bites. We can simply be present with the direct experience itself. Tonight, as you notice thoughts arising and passing in your mind, Can you see them as temporary appearances rather than solid realities? Like the sound of Master Hogan's clap, they arise from nowhere and return to nowhere, leaving only the spacious awareness in which they appear and disappear. As the Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. Whether we're grasping hot coals or painted geese, the suffering comes not from the objects themselves, but from our attempt to hold on to what is inherently fluid and impermanent. Our next story reveals the profound teaching that emerges when the thinking mind reaches its absolute limits. This is Kyogen's riddle of the man hanging from a tree branch by his teeth alone. In a monastery where morning mist drifted through bamboo groves and the sound of meditation bells marked the gentle rhythm of monastic life, the Zen master Kyogen regularly challenged his students with puzzling questions designed to push their understanding beyond conventional thinking. Unlike academic problems that could be solved through analysis and reasoning, these koans were specifically crafted to exhaust the intellectual mind and open doorways to direct insight. One particular morning, as monks gathered in the meditation hall for their daily Dharma talk, Master Kyogen presented them with an unusual scenario. His voice carried the authority of deep practice, yet maintained the playful quality of someone who understood that the most profound truths often appeared in the most unexpected forms. "I want you to imagine," Kyogen began, his eyes scanning the assembled monks, "a man who finds himself hanging from a high tree branch. But this is no ordinary predicament. He is suspended entirely by his teeth, gripping the branch with only his mouth. His hands cannot reach any other branches for support. His feet dangle freely in the air, unable to touch the trunk or find any foothold whatsoever." The monks listened intently, visualizing this precarious situation. They could almost feel the man's desperation, the strength required to maintain such a grip, the terror of the inevitable fall. "Now," Master Kyogen continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "imagine that just as this man hangs there in this impossible position, a traveler walks beneath the tree. This traveler looks up and asks the hanging man a question, the most important question in all of Zen Buddhism. What is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?" The question hung in the air like the imaginary man hung from the branch. The monks knew this was the fundamental koan of their tradition, asking about the essential meaning of Zen Buddhism itself. Why the great Master Bodhidharma had traveled from India to China to transmit the Dharma. Master Kyogen's gaze intensified as he presented the impossible dilemma. If the man in the tree does not answer the traveler's question, he fails in his duty as a student of Dharma. He ignores someone genuinely seeking wisdom and abandons his responsibility to share the teachings. But if he opens his mouth to speak, he will lose his grip on the branch and fall to his death. The meditation hall fell into complete silence. The monks sat motionless, their minds wrestling with the paradox. They could see no logical solution. Every option led to failure. Either spiritual failure through silence or physical death through speech. At this very moment, Kyogen asked with penetrating clarity, what should he do? Minutes passed in heavy silence. Some monks furrowed their brows in concentration, trying to find a clever solution. Others sat with expressions of bewilderment, recognizing that conventional thinking could not resolve this dilemma. Still others seemed to understand that the koan was pointing towards something beyond the realm of choice altogether. Finally, one young monk raised his hand tentatively. "Master, perhaps he could motion with his eyes, or nod his head to indicate the answer without speaking." Kyogen shook his head gently. "The question requires a verbal response. The Dharma must be expressed clearly." Another monk suggested, "Could he write the answer in the dirt below with a stick dropped from his mouth?" Again, Kyogen declined the solution. The traveler has asked a direct question and deserves a direct answer. What should the man do? The monks continued to struggle, proposing various clever solutions, but each was met with the same gentle refusal from their master. Gradually, they began to understand that this was not a problem to be solved through ingenuity or lateral thinking. The koan was designed to lead them to a place beyond the choosing mind altogether. As the Buddha observed, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom illuminates the deeper teaching embedded in Kyogen's impossible scenario. The story reveals our fundamental attachment to dualistic thinking, the belief that we must choose between opposing alternatives rather than discovering a third possibility that transcends both. Why does this koan perplex us so thoroughly? Zen Buddhism explains that our ordinary consciousness operates through constant categorization and choice-making. We believe every situation must be resolved through selecting one option from a set of available alternatives: life or death, speaking or silence, success or failure. This binary thinking, while useful for practical decision-making, becomes a prison when we mistake it for the only way consciousness can operate. The man hanging from the tree represents all of us suspended between impossible choices in our daily lives. We hang by our teeth between competing demands, conflicting values, and seemingly irreconcilable options. Should we prioritize career advancement or family time? Should we speak up about injustice or maintain harmony? Should we hold on to a relationship or let it go? Like the man in the tree, we often feel that any choice we make will result in some form of failure or loss. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The koan points beyond the thinking mind's demand for resolution toward a different kind of knowing entirely. This is not anti-intellectual or irrational, but rather trans-rational, a way of responding that includes but transcends ordinary reasoning. Consider moments in your own life when you've been caught in apparently impossible dilemmas. Perhaps you've experienced the paralysis that comes from over-analyzing a decision until every option seems simultaneously necessary and impossible. The harder you think, the more trapped you become, like the man whose grip weakens the longer he hangs from the branch. The Buddha said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." This teaching suggests that the resolution to Kyogen's koan and to our own impossible dilemmas lies not in finding the right choice, but in discovering the awareness that exists prior to choosing. This is the place of don't know mind that Zen practice cultivates, a state of open alertness that can respond appropriately without being trapped by conceptual analysis. In Zen practice, we learn to recognize the difference between responding and reacting. Reacting emerges from the thinking mind's automatic patterns of choice and rejection. Responding arises from a deeper intelligence that can meet each situation freshly, without the burden of predetermined options. This response often surprises even ourselves, because it emerges from wisdom rather than calculation. The man in the tree must discover what exists beyond the choice between speaking and silence, beyond the duality of life and death. This discovery doesn't happen through thinking harder or finding a clever solution. It happens through releasing the grip of conceptual mind altogether and allowing a deeper intelligence to express itself. Tonight, as you encounter decisions both small and large, can you sense the part of you that exists prior to choosing? Before your mind generates lists of pros and cons, before anxiety about making the right choice arises, there is a spacious awareness that can respond with wisdom and spontaneity. Buddha's final words remind us, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. The man hanging from the tree, like all of us, exists only temporarily in his predicament. The question is not how to solve the impossible problem, but how to awaken to the unconditioned awareness that was never trapped in the first place. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about the transformation from intellectual knowledge to direct experience. This is the tale of Tokusan's unexpected education. In medieval China, during an era when Buddhist scholarship flourished alongside Zen practice, there lived a brilliant monk named Tokusan who had dedicated his entire life to studying the Diamond Sutra, one of Buddhism's most profound and complex texts. His monastery room overflowed with commentaries, annotations, and scholarly treatises he had written about this sacred scripture. His reputation as a master of Buddhist philosophy spread throughout the land, drawing students who sought to understand the sutra's intricate teachings about emptiness and non-attachment. Tokusan took tremendous pride in his intellectual achievements. He could recite vast passages from memory, explain the most subtle philosophical points, and debate the finest details of interpretation with other learned monks. In his mind, he had penetrated the deepest meanings of the Buddha's wisdom through years of careful study and analysis. When news reached him about the growing influence of Zen schools in southern China, Tokusan was both curious and skeptical. These Zen practitioners claimed that enlightenment could be attained through direct experience rather than scriptural study. They suggested that the true Dharma was transmitted from mind to mind, beyond words and letters. To Tokusan, this seemed not only arrogant, but potentially dangerous. How could anyone claim to understand Buddhist truth without mastering the sacred texts? "I will go south," Tokusan declared to his fellow scholars, "and demonstrate the errors in their thinking. These Zen monks may be sincere, but they are surely misguided if they believe enlightenment can be achieved without deep study of the sutras." He carefully packed his extensive collection of Diamond Sutra commentaries into a large traveling pack and set off on the long journey south. The weight of all those manuscripts bent his back, but he carried them proudly as symbols of his scholarly achievement and spiritual authority. After many days of walking along mountain paths and through river valleys, Tokusan grew weary and hungry. As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, he spotted a small roadside tea house where an elderly woman was selling rice cakes to travelers. The simple structure offered welcome shade, and the aroma of freshly cooked rice made his stomach growl with hunger. Approaching the humble stall, Tokusan set down his heavy pack with visible relief. The old woman looked up from her cooking with kind but sharp eyes that seemed to see more than their years might suggest. "Venerable sir," she said with a respectful bow, "you look tired from your journey. What brings you so far from home with such a heavy burden?" Tokusan straightened with pride, gesturing toward his pack. "These are my renowned commentaries on the Diamond Sutra," he announced. "I have spent decades studying this most sacred text and have written extensive scholarly works explaining its profound meanings. I am traveling south to share this wisdom with certain monks who seem to have lost their way." The old woman nodded thoughtfully, stirring her rice cakes with a wooden spoon. "How remarkable," she said. "You must indeed be very learned. Perhaps you can help me understand something that has puzzled me." Tokusan smiled condescendingly, expecting a simple question about basic Buddhist concepts. "Of course, grandmother. I would be happy to enlighten you." The woman's eyes twinkled with an intelligence that made Tokusan suddenly uncomfortable. The Diamond Sutra teaches that the past mind cannot be grasped, the present mind cannot be grasped, and the future mind cannot be grasped. "If this is true, venerable scholar, which mind will you use to eat these rice cakes?" The question struck Tokusan like lightning splitting a tree. All his years of study, all his elaborate commentaries, all his intellectual pride crumbled in an instant. He stood speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Every scholarly answer he might have offered revealed itself as empty conceptual play, missing the direct reality the old woman pointed toward. For the first time in his life, this master of Buddhist philosophy had no words. The simple question exposed the vast gap between his theoretical knowledge and actual understanding. Humbled and confused, he abandoned his original mission and instead sought out a Zen master named Ryutan. For months, Tokusan studied under Ryutan, gradually releasing his attachment to intellectual understanding. Yet despite sincere effort, he felt no progress toward the direct insight he now knew he lacked. His scholarly mind kept interfering, analyzing and categorizing every experience rather than simply being present with it. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day of meditation, Tokusan sat talking with Master Ryutan by candlelight. The conversation meandered through various aspects of practice, but underneath Tokusan's words lay deep frustration with his lack of breakthrough. "It grows late," Ryutan observed gently. "You should return to your quarters and rest." Tokusan bowed respectfully and walked toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he turned back. "Master, it is completely dark outside. I cannot see the path to my room." Without hesitation, Ryutan lit a second candle from the first and held it out toward Tokusan. The warm light flickered invitingly, promising to illuminate the dark path ahead. Tokusan reached out gratefully to accept this simple kindness. At the precise moment his fingers were about to close around the candle, Ryutan suddenly leaned forward and blew out the flame. In that instant of absolute, unexpected darkness, all of Tokusan's seeking, all his concepts about enlightenment, all his learned understanding vanished like the extinguished flame. What remained was pure, immediate presence. No past scholarly achievements, no future spiritual attainments, no present analysis of experience. Just this moment of not knowing, complete and perfect. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who said it, no matter if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true wisdom must be verified through direct experience rather than accepted as conceptual knowledge. Why do we so readily substitute intellectual understanding for actual insight? Zen Buddhism points to several aspects of our conditioned mind that create this confusion. First is our natural tendency to collect experiences as mental objects rather than fully receiving them. We take notes on beauty instead of being moved by it. We analyze love instead of loving. We study presence instead of being present. Second is our culture's deep conditioning that equates information with wisdom. We live in an era where vast amounts of data are instantly available, creating the illusion that knowing about something is equivalent to knowing something directly. A person might read dozens of books about swimming while never entering water, yet believe they understand swimming. Third is the ego's investment in being the one who knows. Tokusan's scholarly pride wasn't simply intellectual vanity, it was his entire sense of identity. When the old woman's question revealed the limitations of his approach, his whole self-concept was threatened. This is why genuine spiritual insight often requires what Zen calls great doubt, a willingness to not know that creates space for direct experience. The old woman's question about which mind eats the rice cakes points to a fundamental error in how we relate to experience. The Diamond Sutra's teaching that past, present, and future minds cannot be grasped doesn't mean that eating doesn't happen. It means that the one who eats cannot be found as a solid, graspable entity separate from the eating itself. This is not philosophical speculation, but immediate reality available in every moment. Zen Master Bankei taught, "In the unborn, all things are perfectly resolved." The candle that Ryu Tan extinguished represents all our seeking, planning, and spiritual ambition. When these mental activities are suddenly eliminated, what remains is the unborn, the unconditioned awareness that was never actually obscured by our thoughts about it. Consider your own relationship with learning and knowing. How often do you substitute reading about meditation for actually meditating? How frequently do you analyze emotions instead of feeling them fully? Can you sense the difference between knowing about love and the direct experience of loving? The Buddha said, "Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth." Truth doesn't hide behind concepts or reveal itself through scholarly analysis. Like the sun, it illuminates everything directly and immediately. Tokusan's enlightenment came not through accumulating more knowledge, but through the sudden elimination of the one who was trying to know. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, can you set aside everything you think you know about rest and simply experience the direct reality of your body relaxing? Like Tokusan accepting Ryutan's candle, can you receive each moment without immediately analyzing or categorizing it? As the Buddha taught, it is better to travel well than to arrive. The journey from intellectual knowledge to direct wisdom doesn't end with a final destination where we possess enlightenment like a diploma. Instead, it's an ongoing process of meeting each moment with fresh awareness, allowing experience to teach us what no book can convey. Let us now turn to a tale about patience, presence, and the paradox of mastery. This is the story of Matajuro and his unconventional sword training. In feudal Japan, during an era when the way of the sword was considered both a martial art and a spiritual path, there lived a young man named Matajuro Yagyu, whose father was renowned as one of the greatest swordsmen in the land. Despite this prestigious lineage, Matajuro had shown little natural ability with the blade. His movements lacked grace, his timing was poor, and his mind seemed constantly distracted during practice. Eventually, his disappointed father, seeing no hope for his son's improvement, made the painful decision to disown him. Devastated, but not defeated, Matajuro resolved to prove his worth by becoming a master swordsman through his own efforts. He had heard of a legendary teacher named Banzo who lived in the mountains, a master so skilled and wise that students traveled from across the country seeking his instruction. Matajuro gathered his few possessions and set off on the long, difficult journey to find this teacher. When he finally located Banzo's remote mountain dwelling, Matajuro found a man whose presence embodied the very essence of the warrior's path. Banzo moved with fluid precision, his eyes alert yet peaceful, his entire being radiating the calm intensity of complete mastery. Everything about him suggested decades of dedicated practice that had refined technique into art and art into spiritual expression. "Master Banzo," Matajuro said, bowing deeply with the respect due to such a renowned teacher, "I have traveled far to request your instruction in the way of the sword. My father has disowned me because of my poor abilities, but I am determined to become a worthy swordsman. Please accept me as your student." Banzo studied the young man for a long moment, his experienced eyes taking in not just Matajuro's appearance, but something deeper, his character, his motivation, his capacity for the demanding training that lay ahead. "You wish to learn swordsmanship under my guidance?" Banzo asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the true nature of mastery. "I must tell you honestly, you do not possess the natural qualifications that make learning swift or easy." Matajuro's heart sank, but he pressed on with desperate determination. "But Master, if I work harder than anyone, if I dedicate myself completely to training, how many years would it take for me to become proficient?" Banzo considered the question carefully. "Given your current abilities and attitude, it would require the rest of your natural life." "The rest of my life?" Matajuro exclaimed, his voice rising with frustration. "That is far too long. Master, I cannot wait decades. If I become your devoted servant, taking care of all your needs while studying, how long then?" "If you become my servant while training," Banzo replied thoughtfully, "perhaps 10 years. Matajuro's eyes lit up with hope, but his impatience drove him to push further. 10 years is still very long, Master. My father grows older each day, and I wish to prove myself while he still lives. If I train even more intensively, practicing day and night with complete dedication, how long would mastery take then?" Banzo's expression grew more serious. "If you approach training with such urgency and intensity, it would require at least 30 years. Matajuro stared at his potential teacher in complete bewilderment. "Master, I don't understand. First you said a lifetime, then 10 years, now 30 years. Why does the time increase when I offer to work harder?" Banzo smiled, with the patient wisdom of someone who had seen countless eager students make the same fundamental error. "The answer is simple, young man. A person who is in such a desperate hurry to achieve results is someone who will learn very slowly indeed. Impatience is the greatest obstacle to mastery." Finally understanding that his very urgency was the barrier to his progress, Matajuro humbly agreed to Banzo's terms. "I accept your conditions, Master. I will study under you for as long as necessary, without attachment to timeline or outcome." However, Banzo's first instruction surprised him completely. "You are forbidden to speak of swordsmanship, think about sword techniques, or even touch a sword during your time here. Your only duties are to serve as my attendant, cook my meals, wash the dishes, clean the house, tend the garden, and maintain the grounds." For 3 long years, Matajuro performed these mundane tasks while watching his dream of sword mastery seem to slip away. He cooked rice, swept floors, and pulled weeds while other students practiced forms and sparred with wooden swords. His hands, once eager to grip a blade, grew calloused from domestic work. His mind, previously filled with visions of martial glory, gradually settled into the simple rhythms of daily service. Then, one ordinary afternoon, while Matajuro was washing dishes behind the house, Master Banzo crept up silently and struck him powerfully across the shoulders with a wooden practice sword. The blow was swift, unexpected, and painful. Before Matajuro could react or even understand what had happened, Banzo disappeared. From that moment forward, Matajuro's life transformed completely. Day and night, without warning, Banzo would appear from behind trees, around corners, or through doorways, delivering sudden strikes with his wooden sword. Matajuro learned to sleep lightly, eat quickly, and work with constant peripheral awareness. Every moment became a test of alertness and responsiveness. Initially, Matajuro tried to anticipate Banzo's attacks through careful observation and logical prediction, but the master's timing was completely unpredictable, sometimes striking twice in 1 hour, sometimes waiting 3 days between attacks. Gradually, Matajuro stopped trying to think his way to safety and instead developed an intuitive sensitivity to his surroundings. This constant training in presence and awareness lasted for several more years. Matajuro learned to sense approaching danger not through analysis, but through direct perception. His body developed the ability to respond instantly without conscious thought. Most importantly, his mind learned to remain calm and centered even under the threat of sudden attack. Through this unconventional method, Matajuro Yagyu eventually became one of the most celebrated swordsmen in Japanese history, developing techniques and teachings that influenced martial arts for generations. As the Buddha observed, patience is the greatest remedy for anger and the foundation of all virtues. The deeper teaching here shows us how genuine mastery in any field requires a complete transformation of our relationship with time, effort, and achievement. Why do we consistently believe that more intense effort will produce faster results? Zen Buddhism explains that this reflects our fundamental misunderstanding of how learning actually occurs. True mastery doesn't happen through forcing or rushing, but through allowing natural development to unfold at its own pace. Like trying to make a flower bloom faster by pulling on its petals, impatience destroys the very process it hopes to accelerate. Matajuro's story reveals several crucial insights about the nature of skill development. First, the foundation of any mastery is presence. The ability to be completely aware of what is happening right now. All his years of mundane service were actually training in this fundamental capacity. By learning to be fully present while washing dishes or tending gardens, he developed the alert awareness essential for martial arts. Second, true learning happens below the level of conscious effort. When Matajuro stopped trying to anticipate Banzo's attacks through mental strategy and instead developed intuitive responsiveness, he accessed a deeper level of intelligence. This is what Zen calls beginner's mind, an openness that allows new understanding to emerge naturally. Third, the ego's desire for quick achievement often prevents the very learning it seeks. Matajuro's initial impatience came from wanting to prove himself, to achieve a status or identity as a master swordsman. Only when he surrendered this goal-oriented thinking could actual mastery develop. Consider your own relationship with learning and improvement. Whether you're developing a creative skill, building relationships, or pursuing spiritual growth, can you notice when impatience creates tension that interferes with natural development. How often do you try to force outcomes rather than trusting the organic process of gradual refinement? Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Banzo's unconventional teaching method kept Matajuro in beginner's mind for years, preventing him from crystallizing premature habits or limited approaches to swordsmanship. The Buddha said, "Everything arises and passes away. When you see this, you are above sorrow." This teaching applies directly to our impatience with learning. When we truly understand that all skills develop gradually through countless small improvements, we can release our attachment to dramatic breakthroughs and instead appreciate the subtle progress that happens moment by moment. Banzo's surprise attacks weren't random acts of aggression, but carefully designed invitations to presence. Each strike asked Matajuro, "Are you here now? Are you paying attention? Can you respond from awareness rather than reaction?" This is the essential training for any aspect of life. Learning to be so present that appropriate responses arise naturally from the situation itself. In Zen archery, there is a saying, "The archer becomes one with the arrow, the bow, and the target." Matajuro's training taught him to become one with each moment, each task, each challenge. This unity consciousness is the foundation of all mastery, whether in martial arts, meditation, or the art of living itself. Tonight, as you notice your mind rushing toward tomorrow's goals or yesterday's regrets, can you practice Matajuro's hard-won lesson? Can you trust that whatever you're developing, patience, skill, wisdom, or love, will unfold naturally when you bring complete presence to each moment? Buddha's final teaching reminds us, decay is inherent in all compounded things. Work out your salvation with diligence. True diligence isn't frantic effort, but sustained, patient attention. Like Matajuro learning the taste of Banzo's sword, we can learn to savor the gradual, inevitable process of our own awakening. Now, let us explore a Zen story about distinguishing between impressive spectacles and genuine spiritual accomplishment. This tale speaks to the very heart of what constitutes true liberation. In a region of Tibet where prayer flags fluttered against snow-capped peaks and ancient monasteries perched on impossible cliffsides, there lived a community of monks renowned throughout the land for their extreme ascetic practices and the development of supernatural abilities. Their monastery, built into the face of a sheer mountain wall, could only be reached by a treacherous climbing path that took most visitors an entire day to navigate. The very remoteness of their location spoke to their dedication to transcending ordinary human limitations. These monks had devoted themselves to intensive meditation retreats that often lasted for years at a time. They practiced complex breathing techniques, visualizations, and mental disciplines that pushed the boundaries of what most people considered humanly possible. Through decades of such training, several of them had developed what Tibetan Buddhism calls siddhis, extraordinary powers that seem to defy the natural laws of physics. One particular monk had become famous for his ability to walk across water as easily as solid ground. Another could levitate several feet into the air during deep meditation. A third had developed the capacity to generate such intense inner heat that he could melt snow with his body warmth alone, even in the harshest winter conditions. These accomplishments had attracted pilgrims from hundreds of miles away. all hoping to witness these miraculous demonstrations of spiritual advancement. When word reached a humble Zen master about this monastery and its remarkable inhabitants, he decided to make the difficult journey to visit them. Unlike many pilgrims who came seeking spiritual entertainment or hoping to acquire supernatural powers themselves, this master was genuinely curious about the relationship between such abilities and actual awakening. The journey took him 2 weeks of walking through mountain passes and alpine meadows, where wildflowers bloomed despite the thin air. When he finally arrived at the monastery, the resident monks received him with great hospitality, eager to share their achievements with a fellow practitioner who might appreciate the depth of their accomplishments. After several days of rest and conversation about various aspects of Dharma practice, the monks decided to offer their visitor a demonstration of their most impressive abilities. They led him to a wide river that rushed down from the surrounding glaciers, its waters so swift and cold that no ordinary person could survive immersion for more than a few minutes. The monk, who had mastered water walking, positioned himself at the river's edge. With perfect composure and evident pride in his achievement, he stepped out onto the churning surface. His feet found solid support where there should have been only liquid chaos. Step by measured step, he walked across the entire width of the river, his robes remaining completely dry, his movements as stable as if he were crossing a paved courtyard. The assembled monks watched in respectful silence, then burst into appreciative murmurs when their colleagues safely reached the opposite bank. They looked expectantly at their visiting Zen master, anticipating his amazement and admiration for such an extraordinary demonstration of spiritual power. The monk who had performed this feat returned to shore with evident satisfaction, his chest swelling slightly with legitimate pride. He approached the Zen master with a respectful bow and asked, "There, master, what do you think of such an accomplishment? Have you ever witnessed anything comparable?" The visiting master received the question with the gentle attention he brought to all interactions, neither dismissing the monk's achievement nor expressing the awe that was clearly expected. His response carried no trace of mockery or condescension, only a curious interest in understanding. "That is indeed a most impressive demonstration," he said sincerely. "Such abilities clearly require tremendous dedication and years of disciplined practice. I am genuinely curious. How long did it take you to develop this remarkable skill?" The water-walking monk straightened with visible pride, pleased that his efforts were being properly acknowledged. "It required 20 years of intensive training, master. 20 years of specific meditation practices, dietary disciplines, and gradual development of the necessary inner conditions. It was not achieved easily or quickly." The Zen master nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the profound implications of such sustained effort and dedication. 20 years, he repeated slowly. That represents an extraordinary investment of time and energy. Truly remarkable commitment. Then, with the same gentle curiosity, he reached into the simple traveling pouch he carried and withdrew a small, worn coin. Holding it up so all the monks could see it clearly, he continued, "You know, when I was walking through the village at the base of your mountain yesterday, I met an old ferryman who operates a small boat on this very same river." The monks listened intently, unsure where this observation was leading. "This kind gentleman," the master continued, examining the modest coin in his palm, "will transport anyone across these same waters for just this one small coin. The journey takes perhaps 5 minutes, and he's been providing this service to travelers for many years." The simplicity of this statement settled over the gathering like morning mist. The master's words carried no judgment or criticism, yet they illuminated something profound about the relationship between spiritual accomplishment and practical wisdom. I find myself wondering, he concluded gently, about the difference between developing extraordinary abilities and cultivating genuine liberation. Both require great effort, but perhaps they lead to very different destinations. The monk stood in contemplative silence, each processing the implications of this unexpected perspective. The water-walking monk, in particular, seemed to be reconsidering not just his demonstration, but the entire framework within which he had understood his spiritual development. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. This ancient wisdom illuminates the essential distinction between spectacular spiritual achievements and the simple, profound liberation that comes from understanding our true nature. Why are we so consistently impressed by extraordinary abilities while overlooking the miracle of ordinary presence? Zen Buddhism points to several aspects of human conditioning that create this misplaced focus. First is our natural tendency to be captivated by the unusual and dramatic, while taking the everyday for granted. We notice the person who can levitate but ignore the wonder of our own breathing. We're amazed by telepathy, but miss the miracle of genuine communication between hearts. Second is the ego's fascination with accumulating spiritual accomplishments as if they were material possessions. The development of supernatural powers can become another form of spiritual materialism, collecting impressive abilities rather than releasing the collector altogether. This is why many wisdom traditions warn that siddhis, while possible to develop, can actually become obstacles to enlightenment if they strengthen our sense of being a special someone who possesses remarkable qualities. Third is our confusion between complexity and profundity. We assume that more difficult practices necessarily lead to deeper insights, when often the reverse is true. The most profound spiritual truths are remarkably simple, so simple that we often overlook them in our search for something more elaborate and impressive. The ferryman in the story represents what Zen calls ordinary mind, the capacity to meet each situation with appropriate, skillful action without needing to transcend natural laws or demonstrate supernatural abilities. His small boat accomplishes the same practical result as the monk's water walking, but with efficiency, sustainability, and service to others rather than personal achievement. Consider your own spiritual aspirations and practices. How often do you find yourself more attracted to dramatic experiences or unusual phenomena than to the simple development of wisdom, compassion, and presence? Can you notice when your practice becomes focused on acquiring special states or abilities rather than understanding what you already are? Zen Master Joshu taught, "The cypress tree in the garden," meaning that enlightenment is found in ordinary reality exactly as it appears, not in escaping to extraordinary realms or developing supernatural capacities. The cypress tree doesn't need to become something other than what it is to express the Buddha nature. Similarly, we don't need to walk on water to embody awakening. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The ferryman's simple service brings peace, safe passage across dangerous waters for anyone who needs it. The monk's spectacular demonstration, while impressive, serves primarily to amazement rather than genuine assistance. This raises profound questions about the purpose and direction of our spiritual efforts. This doesn't mean that developing unusual abilities is inherently wrong or that all extraordinary experiences should be dismissed. Rather, it invites us to examine our motivation and to keep such phenomena in proper perspective. Are we seeking powers to serve others or to inflate our sense of spiritual importance? Are we using dramatic experiences to avoid the more challenging work of transforming our character and understanding? The true miracle, Zen suggests, is the capacity to live with wisdom, kindness, and presence in each ordinary moment. To listen deeply when someone speaks. To respond appropriately to whatever circumstances arise. To remain centered during both praise and criticism. To work for the benefit of all beings without attachment to recognition or reward. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual journey, can you appreciate the extraordinary nature of your ordinary capacities? Your ability to love, to be aware, to choose kindness over cruelty. These are the real supernatural powers that transform both ourselves and our world. As the Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The ferryman's humble service lights countless candles of safe passage. In choosing practical wisdom over spectacular achievement, he embodies the very essence of enlightened action. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between submission and genuine understanding. This is the lesson of the proud priest and the gentle master. Master Bankei had gained quite a reputation throughout the region. Unlike other teachers who filled their talks with complex philosophical arguments and lengthy quotations from ancient texts, Bankei spoke directly from his heart to the hearts of his listeners. His words were simple but profound, accessible to farmers and scholars alike. People from all walks of life, merchants, servants, samurai, and monks, gathered to hear him speak about the natural peace that exists within every person. The master's growing popularity began to trouble a priest from the Nichiren sect, whose own temple had grown noticeably emptier as his followers left to hear about Zen. This priest had built his identity around being learned, respected, and obeyed. He prided himself on his knowledge of scriptures and his ability to win theological debates. The idea that a simple Zen teacher could attract his devoted followers with plain speaking felt like a personal insult. Determined to expose what he assumed must be shallow teaching disguised as wisdom, the Nichiren priest stormed into one of Bankei's gatherings. He pushed through the crowd of seated listeners, his robes billowing dramatically, his face stern with righteous indignation. The peaceful atmosphere of quiet attention was suddenly charged with tension as people turned to see what was happening. "Hey, Zen teacher!" the priest called out loudly, his voice echoing through the hall. The deliberate rudeness of his address was unmistakable. He was treating the revered master like a common street performer. "Wait just a minute. I have something to say to you." Bankei looked up calmly from where he sat, showing no sign of irritation or defensiveness at the interruption. His eyes held the same gentle attention he gave to every person who approached him, whether they came with genuine questions or hostile challenges. "All these people here respect you and will obey whatever you say," the priest continued, his voice growing louder as he warmed to his challenge. "But a man like myself does not respect you at all. Can you make me obey you? Can your so-called wisdom compel someone who sees through your simple tricks?" The crowd held its breath, expecting either an angry response or a learned rebuttal that would put this arrogant challenger in his place. Instead, Bankai smiled, with what appeared to be genuine warmth and curiosity. "Please come up beside me," the master said gently, "and I will show you." The priest, feeling triumphant that he had provoked a response and confident in his ability to expose whatever manipulation was about to unfold, proudly pushed his way through the crowd to the front of the hall. He stood beside the master's simple cushion, his chest puffed out with self-importance, ready to demonstrate his independence from this supposed authority. "Thank you," Bankai said with the same gentle smile. "Now we might hear each other better if you come over to my left side. Please step over here." Without thinking, the priest moved to Bankai's left side. It seemed like a reasonable request after all. "Actually," Bankai continued thoughtfully, "perhaps we could speak more clearly if you were on my right side instead. Would you mind stepping over there?" Again, the priest complied automatically. It was such a small, sensible adjustment that he didn't even notice he was following instructions. Bankai's smile deepened, his eyes twinkling with gentle amusement. "You see," he observed quietly, "you are already obeying me. And I think you are actually a very gentle, cooperative person. Now please sit down and listen to what I have to share." The priest stood frozen, suddenly realizing what had just happened. He had come to demonstrate his independence and superiority, but had instead revealed his natural willingness to respond cooperatively to kind, reasonable requests. His whole argument had dissolved not through force or clever rhetoric, but through his own unconscious behavior. The crowd remained silent, but many people were struggling not to smile. They had witnessed something remarkable, not a defeat or humiliation, but a gentle revelation. The master had shown that true influence comes not from demanding obedience, but from inviting natural cooperation. The priest felt his anger and arrogance melting away, replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. How had this simple man accomplished what felt like magic? How had he transformed a hostile confrontation into a moment of mutual understanding without ever raising his voice or asserting his authority? Still somewhat dazed by the experience, the priest sat down. As Bankai began to speak again, the words seemed to bypass his analytical mind and speak directly to his heart. For the first time in years, he listened not to find flaws or prepare counter-arguments, but simply to hear what was being offered. Buddha's wisdom tells us, true obedience is not blind submission, but conscious harmony. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between the compliance that comes from fear or social pressure and the natural cooperation that arises from genuine understanding. Why do we so often confuse authority with authoritarianism, influence with coercion? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning around power. We assume that getting others to cooperate requires force, manipulation, or the assertion of superiority. But the deepest teaching here shows us that true leadership emerges from understanding human nature, not from overpowering it. The priest came expecting to encounter someone who would try to dominate him because that was the only model of authority he knew, when instead he met someone who simply invited his natural cooperativeness. His entire framework for understanding power and influence was gently challenged. Consider your own experiences with authority. The teachers, bosses, or leaders who most positively influenced your life. Did they command your respect through force, or did they earn it by appealing to your better nature? The difference is profound. Forced compliance creates resentment and resistance, while invited cooperation creates genuine change. In our daily relationships, we often fall into the same trap as the priest. We approach conflicts assuming we need to overpower others to get what we want. We prepare arguments, marshal our defenses, and ready ourselves for battle. But Bankei's approach suggests a different possibility. What if we assumed the best about others and invited their natural wisdom to emerge? Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over." The priest's aggression came from his own insecurity and fear of being displaced. Bankei's genius lay in seeing past the hostile surface to the suffering underneath, then responding to the suffering rather than the aggression. This doesn't mean being passive or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. Bankei maintained clear boundaries and didn't submit to the priest's demands for a debate. Instead, he redirected the energy of the encounter towards something more constructive. He transformed a potential power struggle into a teaching moment. The Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. This principle applies not just to obvious hatred, but to all forms of resistance and conflict. When we meet resistance with resistance, we simply create more tension. When we meet resistance with understanding, we create space for transformation. Tonight, as you consider the relationships and situations in your life where you feel the need to assert your will or defend your position, can you remember the gentle master who never commanded obedience, yet received complete cooperation? Can you find ways to invite others' natural wisdom rather than trying to overpower their resistance? As the Buddha observed, in separateness lies the world's greatest misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. True authority comes not from the power to make others obey, but from the wisdom to help them discover their own desire to cooperate in creating something beautiful together. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about how customs can outlive their purpose. This is the lesson of the monastery cat and the scholars who forgot. In a peaceful monastery nestled in the mountains, a community of monks dedicated themselves to regular meditation practice. Every evening, as the sun set behind the peaks and shadows grew long across the temple grounds, they would gather in the meditation hall for their most important practice session of the day. This was a time of deep silence and inner contemplation that had been maintained for generations. However, the monastery was also home to a particularly vocal cat who had made the temple grounds his territory. This cat had developed the unfortunate habit of appearing during the evening meditation sessions, meowing loudly, knocking over water bowls, and generally creating disturbances that made it difficult for the monks to maintain the focused attention their practice required. Night after night, the monks would attempt to settle into deep meditation, only to be interrupted by the cat's antics. Some tried to ignore the disruptions. Others attempted to gently shoo the animal away, but nothing seemed to work consistently. The cat seemed to have an uncanny ability to choose the most inopportune moments for his loudest and most distracting behavior. Finally, the spiritual teacher who led the community decided that practical action was needed. Rather than allowing the evening practice to continue being disrupted, he instructed his students to gently capture the cat before each meditation session and tie him securely in a corner of the hall where he could do no harm. This simple solution proved effective. The cat, though present, could no longer disturb the monks' concentration. Years passed peacefully with this arrangement. The evening meditation sessions proceeded without interruption. The monks deepened their practice, and the cat seemed content enough with his restrained position during the evening hours. This became the established routine that everyone accepted as normal and necessary. When the old teacher eventually died, the monks naturally continued all the practices he had established, including the evening tying of the cat. After all, this had been part of their master's wisdom, a tradition he had instituted for important spiritual reasons. They didn't question whether the practice was still necessary. It had simply become an integral part of their evening routine. In time, the original cat also died, having lived a full life in the monastery. The monks, now thoroughly convinced that having a tied cat was essential to proper meditation practice, went to great lengths to acquire another cat specifically for this purpose. They searched until they found a suitable replacement and continued the tradition without interruption. Generations of monks came and went, each learning from their predecessors that tying a cat during evening meditation was a crucial element of their spiritual practice. None questioned why this was necessary. It was simply how things had always been done in their tradition. Centuries later, learned descendants of the spiritual teacher wrote scholarly treatises about the religious significance of tying up a cat for meditation practice. They developed elaborate theories about the symbolic meaning of the restrained cat, its representation of taming the wild mind, and its importance in creating the proper spiritual atmosphere for contemplation. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. This tale unveils how easily practical solutions can transform into meaningless rituals when we stop questioning their original purpose. Why do we continue practices long after their usefulness has ended, simply because they've become traditional? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of understanding the spirit behind forms, rather than blindly following inherited customs that may no longer serve their intended function. The original teacher's decision to tie the cat was purely practical, a simple solution to a specific problem. But over time, this practical measure became ritualized, then sacralized, then analyzed as if it contained profound spiritual meaning that had always been intentional. Consider the various traditions, rules, and customs in your own life, both personal and cultural. How many of these practices do you follow simply because that's how it's always been done, rather than because they serve a current purpose? The monastery's cat represents all the meaningless forms we maintain out of habit rather than wisdom. This teaching applies to spiritual practices, workplace procedures, family traditions, and social customs. Over time, solutions to specific problems can become rigid requirements that persist long after the original problems have disappeared. What began as skillful means becomes empty ritual. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between the finger pointing at the moon and the moon itself, between the forms that serve awakening and awakening itself. The tied cat was never the point. Peaceful meditation was the point. But succeeding generations lost sight of this distinction. The Buddha said, "My teaching is like a raft. It is for crossing over, not for holding onto." The cat tying tradition represents what happens when we turn temporary rafts into permanent shrines, mistaking the means for the end. Look deeply at the various practices and traditions you maintain. Which ones still serve their original purpose, and which ones have become empty forms you follow out of habit? What would it mean to honor the spirit of these practices while remaining flexible about their forms? The scholars who wrote treatises about the cat's religious significance weren't intentionally creating false doctrine. They genuinely believed they were preserving important wisdom. But their analysis was built on a foundation they didn't understand, leading to elaborate explanations of something that had never been intended as spiritual practice. Tonight, as you consider the various routines, traditions, and practices in your life, can you remember the original cat and the practical problem it solved? Can you distinguish between forms that still serve their purpose and those that have become meaningless repetition? As the Buddha observed, believe nothing merely because you have been told it. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. True spiritual maturity involves continuously examining our practices to ensure they serve their intended purpose, rather than simply preserving forms because they've become familiar. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get, so I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a teaching about the profound difference between passive surrender and active compassion. This is the parable of the lion and the fox. In a land where drought had lasted many months and both humans and animals struggled to find sustenance, there lived a man whose heart burned with spiritual longing. Every day he prayed with desperate intensity, asking for the awareness and wisdom that would bring success to his life. His prayers were sincere, but filled with anxiety, for he had tried many approaches to prosperity, various jobs, different strategies, numerous plans, yet nothing had brought him the security and fulfillment he sought. His frustration grew as his resources dwindled and his situation became increasingly precarious. There must be some secret to life that I'm missing, he thought. Some spiritual principle that, once understood, will unlock the doors to abundance and peace. One night, after hours of fervent prayer, he fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In his dream, a voice spoke to him with crystal clarity. "Go into the forest tomorrow morning. There you will find the understanding you seek." The man woke with his heart pounding with excitement and hope. This felt different from ordinary dreams. The voice had carried such authority, such certainty. Without delay, he prepared simple provisions and set out at first light for the ancient forest that bordered his village. For several hours, he wandered among towering trees and winding paths, his eyes searching for some sign, some teacher, some revelation that would provide the answers to his prayers. The morning air was cool and fragrant with wildflowers, but his anxiety made it difficult to appreciate the natural beauty surrounding him. As midday heat began to build, exhaustion forced him to rest beside a small stream. He sat on a smooth boulder, wondering if he had misunderstood the dream's message, when movement caught his eye between two large rocks in a shaded alcove nearby. To his amazement, he discovered a fox lying peacefully in the cool space. But this fox had no legs. Where its limbs should have been, there were only healed scars. Yet the animal appeared calm and well-nourished rather than starving or distressed as he would have expected. How extraordinary, the man thought. How does a creature with no ability to hunt or forage manage to survive in the wilderness? Curious and sensing this might be connected to his spiritual quest, he concealed himself and waited to see what would happen. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden light, he heard heavy footsteps approaching through the underbrush. A magnificent lion emerged into the clearing, carrying fresh meat in its powerful jaws. Without any apparent reason or expectation of return, the lion gently placed the meat directly in front of the legless fox, and then disappeared back into the forest. The man's heart leaped with understanding. "Ah," he exclaimed silently, "now I see the secret to success in life. The answer is complete surrender and trust. I don't need to struggle and strive and worry about providing for myself. All I need to do is have faith that the universe will take care of all my needs. God will provide everything, just as the lion provides for the fox. My role is simply to trust and receive." Filled with this new spiritual insight, the man returned home and immediately began practicing what he believed he had learned. He stopped seeking work, stopped making efforts to improve his situation, and instead spent his days in prayer and meditation, waiting for providence to supply his needs as it had for the legless fox. Days passed, then weeks. His food stores depleted, his strength began to fade, and his situation became desperate. Yet he maintained his faith that his surrender would be rewarded, that his trust would be vindicated by divine intervention. 2 weeks into this experiment, weak from hunger and beginning to doubt his interpretation, the man had another vivid dream. The same authoritative voice that had sent him to the forest now spoke again, but this time with a tone of gentle correction. "Fool," the voice said, not with cruelty, but with compassionate clarity. "Be like the lion, not like the fox." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." The story points us toward understanding the profound difference between spiritual surrender and spiritual service. Why do we sometimes mistake passivity for spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind often seeks the path of least resistance, preferring to receive rather than give, to be cared for rather than to care for others. True surrender involves releasing our attachment to outcomes while maintaining wholehearted engagement with compassionate action. The man's initial interpretation represented a common spiritual misunderstanding, the belief that faith means waiting for external forces to solve our problems. But genuine spiritual maturity involves recognizing our responsibility to be the hands and heart through which compassion flows into the world. Look deeply at your own relationship to giving and receiving. Are there areas where you've been waiting for others to provide what you could offer yourself? Perhaps waiting for someone else to create the community you long for, to start the project you've envisioned, or to show the kindness you wish to see in the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between victim consciousness and co-creator consciousness. The fox, through no choice of its own, required care and received it through the lion's generosity. But humans possess capacities the fox lacks: intelligence, creativity, the ability to plan and provide not only for ourselves, but for others who truly cannot provide for themselves. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual awakening doesn't exempt us from worldly responsibility, but transforms how we engage with it. True faith isn't passive waiting, but active participation in the web of interdependence that connects all beings. We are called to be both lion and fox, receiving grace when we genuinely need it, offering strength when others require our support. Consider the people in your life who might be in the fox's position through circumstances beyond their control: illness, age, disability, or temporary crisis. And consider the areas where you have lion-like capacities, skills, resources, energy, or opportunities that could serve others' well-being. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. This teaching points toward the natural movement from self-preoccupation to selfless service that marks spiritual maturity. The man's transformation from seeking to be cared for to recognizing his calling to care for others represents the shift from spiritual materialism to genuine Dharma practice. Instead of using spirituality to get what we want, we begin using our gifts to give what others need. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, the aspiration to work for the liberation of all beings, rather than seeking only our own comfort and security. This doesn't mean we neglect our genuine needs, but that we hold them within the larger context of universal well-being. The Buddha said, "If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path." Often, the success and fulfillment we seek comes not through focusing on our own needs, but through dedicating ourselves to serving something greater than our personal concerns. This teaching challenges us to examine our motivations for spiritual practice itself. Are we seeking enlightenment as a form of ultimate self-improvement? Or are we cultivating wisdom and compassion to better serve the world's needs? Are we praying for divine provision? Or are we asking how we can become instruments of provision for others? The voice in the dream offered correction with love, not condemnation. The man's initial misunderstanding was part of his learning process, not a spiritual failure. Sometimes we need to experience our own helplessness before we can understand our power to help others. Tonight, as you consider the gifts and capacities you've been given, can you sense how they might be intended, not just for your own security, but for the welfare of others? Can you feel the difference between spiritual seeking that focuses on what you can get and spiritual practice that asks what you can give? As the Buddha taught, in caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others. The lion's generous feeding of the fox represents the natural flow of compassion that arises when we recognize our fundamental interconnection. By being the lion when we can, we ensure that others will be lions for us when we truly need their care. Now, let us explore a story about the nature of genuine assistance and the goal of true teaching. This is the encounter between the psychiatrist and the Zen master. At a gathering of professionals and spiritual teachers, a psychiatrist found himself in conversation with a renowned Zen master. The psychiatrist had built his career on helping people work through their psychological difficulties, analyzing their problems, and providing therapeutic interventions designed to improve their mental health and emotional well-being. Curious about how different approaches to helping might compare, the psychiatrist decided to ask the master a direct question that had been on his mind throughout their conversation. "I've spent years learning various techniques for helping people with their emotional and psychological struggles," the psychiatrist said. "I'm curious about your approach. Exactly how do you help people?" The master listened to the question with the same calm attention he brought to everything, considering not just the words but the assumptions underlying them. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he offered a response that was both simple and profound. "I get them to a place where they can't ask any more questions," the master replied. The psychiatrist paused, uncertain whether this was meant as a serious answer or perhaps some kind of Zen riddle. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "Surely questioning is important in any process of growth and understanding." The master smiled gently. Questions arise from the mind that believes it lacks something. When someone reaches the place where questions naturally cease, they have found what they were truly seeking all along. Buddha's wisdom tells us, doubt everything, find your own light. Yet this ancient teaching reveals a paradox. True finding comes not through endless questioning, but through arriving at a completeness where questions become unnecessary. Why do we assume that helping people means providing answers to their questions, when the deepest healing might involve dissolving the questioner itself? Zen Buddhism points to the possibility that many of our problems exist only because we continue to ask the questions that create and maintain them. The psychiatrist's approach, like that of most helping professions, focuses on analyzing problems, understanding their origins, and developing strategies for managing or resolving them. This method has value and can provide genuine relief for many forms of suffering. But the master's approach suggests something more radical. Helping people transcend the very framework that generates their problems. Consider the endless questions that occupy your own mind. How can I be happier? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What should I do with my life? How can I find meaning? Each question implies a questioner who lacks something, who needs something, who must figure something out. But what if the questioner itself is the source of the seeking? In Zen practice, we discover that many of our problems are maintained by the very effort to solve them. The mind that constantly asks, "How can I find peace?" is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be reinforcing the very sense of separation that creates the feeling of being unenlightened. The master's method of getting people where they can't ask any more questions isn't about suppressing inquiry or promoting ignorance. Rather, it's about guiding people to a direct experience of completeness where questions naturally dissolve because there's nothing more to seek. Zen Master Bankai taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle anything that comes up." When someone truly realizes their fundamental completeness, questions about how to be complete simply cease to arise. Problems don't need to be solved. They're recognized as temporary appearances in the vast space of awareness. This doesn't mean practical questions disappear entirely. What should I have for lunch? Or, which route should I take to work? Are functional questions that serve practical purposes. The questions that cease are the existential ones that arise from a fundamental sense of lack or incompleteness. The Buddha said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This teaching points to the same understanding the Master was indicating. True help comes not from giving people more to do or figure out, but from helping them realize they are already what they seek. Look deeply at your own relationship with questions and seeking. How much of your mental energy goes toward trying to solve the problem of your life rather than living it? What would remain if you stopped asking the questions that assume something is fundamentally wrong or missing? The psychiatrist helps by analyzing and providing tools. The master helps by pointing to what needs no analysis or improvement. Both approaches can serve, but the master's method aims for the root rather than the branches, dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the seeking. Tonight, as you notice the questions that typically occupy your mind, can you sense what lies beneath them? Can you find the space of awareness that exists prior to all questions, the completeness that needs no answers because it lacks nothing? As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The deepest help we can receive or offer others is the recognition that what we seek has never been absent. Questions cease, not because they've been answered, but because the one who was asking them discovers there was never actually anything to ask about. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine. Ah, the teacher said with genuine interest. And who owned it before him? My grandfather, the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead. The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn? The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly, recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired, the parent becomes empty nester, the student becomes teacher, the healthy person faces illness. These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. Because nothing lasts forever. Suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love. And even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. Now, let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that attempt to contain it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery where evening mist gathered among ancient pines, a beloved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily ritual of walking with his faithful dog. The animal's joy was infectious, bounding ahead to retrieve sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was brilliant, his mind sharp as a blade, and equally capable of cutting through complex philosophical concepts. Yet this very intelligence had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist texts, the more contradictions he discovered. His bright mind seemed to be creating obstacles rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his frustration. "Master, I struggle with contradictions in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature. Some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposing instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that intellectual brilliance could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a mathematical equation. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only guideposts. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I'll show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager enthusiasm. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to emerge as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the luminous orb and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded, his finger extended clearly toward the celestial body. The dog's response was immediate and predictable. His gaze fixed intently on the teacher's outstretched finger, following its movement with focused attention he typically reserved for thrown sticks. The animal's entire being concentrated on the pointing digit, completely oblivious to the moon hanging magnificently above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student observed the scene with growing awareness. "He's looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only guideposts. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth." The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally, regardless of whether anyone pointed at it. The truth was like that moon, present and luminous, independent of any description or analysis. As the Buddha observed, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. This teaching addresses the exact confusion that plagued the bright student, mistaking concepts about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how intellectual understanding, while valuable, can become a barrier when we rely on it exclusively. The student's brilliant mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings, but analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog fixated on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and concepts that he missed the reality they attempted to indicate. Why do we become trapped in conceptual understanding? The thinking mind operates through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into categories. But ultimate truth transcends these dualistic distinctions. It cannot be captured in concepts any more than the moon can be held in a photograph. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the frustrating recognition that our usual ways of knowing are inadequate for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same ineffable reality, like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from various angles. Consider how this pattern manifests in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation techniques, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes problematic when we mistake accumulation of spiritual knowledge for spiritual development itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings, but to all areas where we confuse the map for the territory. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy photographing that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists prior to all concepts and categories. This awareness is always present, just as the moon exists whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean abandoning study or intellectual understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our conceptual knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be discarded once they've served their purpose. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable complexity of modern life, can you distinguish between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own innate wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your salvation with diligence. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they indicate. Let us now explore a story about choice, responsibility, and the power we hold in every moment. This is the tale of the young man and the bird. A clever young student had grown tired of his teacher's seemingly wise responses to every question. He was convinced that the old master simply spoke in riddles to appear profound, and he decided to devise a test that would expose what he believed was mere pretense. After thinking for several days, he conceived what he thought was the perfect trap. One morning, the young man caught a small sparrow in the garden. The tiny bird trembled in his cupped hands, its heart beating rapidly against his palms. He held it carefully behind his back as he approached his teacher, who was sitting peacefully in the morning sunlight, reading ancient texts. "Master," the student called out with barely concealed excitement, "I have a question that will test your legendary wisdom." The old teacher looked up from his reading with patient, gentle eyes. He had seen this look of mischievous confidence in many students over the years, and he understood the young man's need to challenge authority as part of his own growth and learning. "Please," the teacher said simply, "ask your question." The student stepped closer, keeping the bird hidden behind his back. "Master, I hold a small bird in my hands. Using your great wisdom, tell me, is this bird alive or dead?" The young man felt incredibly clever. He had created what he believed was an impossible situation for his teacher. If the master answered alive, he would quickly snap the bird's neck and reveal the dead creature, proving the teacher wrong. If the master answered dead, he would simply open his hands and let the living bird fly away, again proving the teacher's lack of true insight. Either way, the student was certain he would expose his teacher's supposed wisdom as nothing more than lucky guessing and philosophical double talk. He waited eagerly for the response that would give him the satisfaction of finally outsmarting the old man. The teacher sat quietly for a long moment, not trying to peer behind the student's back or gather more information. His eyes seemed to look not at the student, but through him, as if perceiving something far deeper than the simple trick being attempted. Finally, with a gentle smile that held both compassion and understanding, the master spoke. "The answer, my young friend, is in your hands." The student stood frozen, his mouth hanging open slightly. In 3 simple words, his elaborate trap had been completely dismantled. The teacher hadn't fallen for either option of the false dilemma. Instead, he had pointed to something far more profound: the fundamental truth that the student himself held the power to determine the outcome. The young man looked down at his hands, still cupped behind his back, feeling the tiny bird's rapid heartbeat against his palms. He realized with startling clarity that the master was right. The bird's fate had never depended on the teacher's answer or supposed wisdom. It had always been entirely in the student's control. More than that, he began to understand that this was true about far more than just this moment. The power to choose life or death, creation or destruction, compassion or cruelty, all of it was always in his hands, in every situation, every day. Slowly, the young man brought his hands forward and opened them. The small bird sat still for just a moment, as if gathering itself, then spread its wings and flew into the blue sky, disappearing among the trees. Buddha's wisdom teaches us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound responsibility that comes with conscious choice and the recognition that we are always the architects of our own experience. Why do we so often look outside ourselves for answers that can only be found within? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to seek authority figures who will tell us what to do, what to think, what to choose. But the deepest teaching is that true wisdom cannot be given from one person to another. It can only be discovered through our own conscious engagement with life. The student's question seemed to be about the teacher's insight, but it was actually about his own power. He was so focused on proving the master wrong that he almost missed the profound truth being offered, that every moment presents us with choices that shape not only our immediate circumstances, but our character and destiny. Consider your own daily decisions, both large and small. How often do you wait for someone else to tell you what the right choice is? How frequently do you seek permission, approval, or guidance for decisions that ultimately rest entirely in your own hands? The young man's bird represents all the power we hold, but sometimes fail to recognize. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual development, we constantly face moments where we hold something precious in our hands: the well-being of others, our own integrity, opportunities for growth or destruction. The outcome depends not on external circumstances or other people's wisdom, but on what we choose to do with the power we possess. The Master's response reveals something crucial about authentic teaching. True teachers don't give answers. They point us back to our own capacity for wisdom. They help us recognize the choices we're already making and the power we already possess, rather than encouraging dependence on their authority. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "We are always in choice, even when we think we're not." The bird in the student's hands represents all the moments when we convince ourselves we have no options, no power, no responsibility. But consciousness always involves choice, and choice always involves responsibility. Look deeply at a current challenge in your life. Where are you waiting for someone else to provide answers, solutions, or direction? What would change if you fully recognize that the power to shape the outcome is already in your hands? This doesn't mean you have control over all external circumstances, but you always have choice about how you respond. The Buddha taught, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." Every thought, every intention, every action is like the student's choice with the bird, an opportunity to create life or death, beauty or suffering, wisdom or ignorance. The answer is always in our hands. Tonight, as you consider the various situations in your life where you seek guidance or feel powerless, can you sense the truth the Master was pointing to? Can you feel the weight of the choices you carry every day, not as a burden, but as the fundamental dignity of conscious existence? As the Buddha observed, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." The bird flies free, not because of the teacher's wisdom, but because of the student's choice. In recognizing our own power to choose life over death, compassion over cruelty, truth over deception, we discover that the answer to every important question has always been in our hands. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the ultimate nature of spiritual truth. This is the encounter between the emperor and the master. In ancient China, there ruled an emperor known throughout the land for his devotion to the Buddhist path. Unlike rulers who concern themselves only with wealth and territory, this emperor had spent years studying sacred texts, supporting monasteries, and seeking the deepest truths of existence. His palace library contained thousands of scrolls, and he had invited many learned monks to share their wisdom. When word reached him of a great Zen master whose understanding transcended conventional knowledge, the emperor immediately sent an invitation. He longed to test his own understanding against this master's renowned wisdom. The day of the master's arrival, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The emperor had prepared elaborate questions that would demonstrate both his devotion and sophisticated grasp of Buddhist doctrine. Surely such preparation would impress even the most accomplished teacher. When the master entered the throne room, he appeared utterly ordinary. His robes were simple and travel-worn, his bearing humble, yet alert. The emperor, seated on his golden throne beneath paintings of Buddhist saints, felt both excited and nervous. "Venerable master," the emperor began, his voice echoing through the vast hall decorated with precious statues and sacred symbols. "I have studied the Buddhist teachings for many years. I have built temples, supported monks, and devoted my life to understanding the sacred path. Now I ask you, what is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist doctrine?" The emperor leaned forward expectantly, anticipating a profound discourse that would confirm his years of study. Perhaps the master would elaborate on the Four Noble Truths or reveal some secret teaching passed down through generations. Instead, the master looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a gaze that seemed to see through all pretense. His response came quietly. Vast emptiness, and not a trace of holiness. Silence filled the throne room. The emperor blinked, certain he had misheard. Where was the elaborate explanation of Buddhist cosmology? Where were the references to sacred texts and divine principles? "If there is no holiness," the emperor asked, his voice betraying confusion and dismay, "then who or what are you? If there is no sacred truth to attain, what makes you a master?" The emperor's questions carried the weight of years spent accumulating spiritual knowledge and religious merit. He had built his identity around being a devout Buddhist ruler, and this master's words seemed to dissolve the foundation of that carefully constructed self-image. The master's response came with the same quiet directness. "I do not know." With these three simple words, the master had stripped away every concept, every identity, every claim to understanding that the emperor had accumulated. The master departed as simply as he had arrived, leaving the emperor in contemplative silence. As the Buddha observed, "Those who think they know, don't know. Those who know they don't know, know." This paradoxical teaching points to the heart of Zen understanding. True wisdom begins not with accumulating knowledge, but with recognizing the limitations of conceptual thinking itself. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual seeking often becomes another form of grasping. We collect teachings and insights like precious jewels, believing enlightenment lies in acquiring enough sacred knowledge. But ultimate truth cannot be possessed or described in conventional terms. The master's declaration of vast emptiness points to shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This doesn't mean nothing exists, but that nothing exists in the solid, independent way our thoughts assume. Every phenomenon arises interdependently without fixed essence. This emptiness is not a concept to understand, but a reality to embody. When the master says there is not a trace of holiness, he's not denying spiritual experience, but pointing to truth that transcends dualistic thinking, separating sacred from ordinary. The very search for holiness implies our present experience lacks something essential when completeness is already here. Consider how this teaching might illuminate your spiritual journey. Have you noticed how the mind tries to turn insights into possessions? We have powerful experiences and want to understand, categorize, and repeat them. Yet each time we grasp, we move away from the simple presence that made them possible. The emperor represents the sincere seeker who has confused spiritual materialism with genuine awakening. His years of study weren't meaningless. but they had become obstacles to direct recognition of what was always present. The Master's "I do not know" represents the wisdom of don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but open unknowing that remains receptive to what is actually happening rather than filtering through preconceptions. From this mind, appropriate action arises without conceptual interference. In our culture that prizes knowledge, admitting "I don't know" feels like failure. But in Zen understanding, this acknowledgement becomes a doorway to fresh perception. The expert mind sees what it expects. The beginner's mind sees what is actually there. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's presence, what would it be like to temporarily set aside everything you think you know about spirituality? Can you taste the freedom in not knowing, the spaciousness that opens when we stop trying to fill emptiness with concepts? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The vast emptiness the Master pointed to is infinitely spacious, containing all possibilities while being limited by none. In recognizing this emptiness as our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle. This moment, exactly as it is, lacking nothing. Let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now, the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air, his friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. "You know I cannot see. The light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine." "Ah," his friend replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets." This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. "Of course," he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. "How thoughtful of you." The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground around the blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern? I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me. The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. My friend, he said gently, why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark. The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions. He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding, without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself, when you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. The moment we realize we've been walking in darkness while believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional, In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor, whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice, all are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out. They burn down. They flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, it illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown?" At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Now, let us experience a Zen story about the unexpected nature of enlightenment. This is the kitchen monk's realization. In the serene mountains surrounding Lake Hakone stood a great monastery known throughout Japan for its rigorous practice and deep wisdom. Among the monks lived a humble man named Ichi, whose life would teach us about the profound difference between seeking and finding. For 55 years, Ichi had labored faithfully in the monastery kitchen, while other monks sat in formal meditation or engaged in scholarly debates. Ichi chopped vegetables, tended fires, and prepared meals with quiet dedication. His hands had grown permanently stained, his back bent from years of service, yet he approached each task with careful attention. But Ichi carried a heavy burden. Since his earliest days, he had been assigned a koan, one of those paradoxical questions that Zen masters use to crack open the thinking mind. His was the famous puzzle: what is the sound of one hand clapping? Day after day, year after year, he wrestled with this question, trying to solve it through logic, intuition, every approach his mind could devise. As decades passed, Ichi began to see himself as a failure. While other monks seemed to progress, receiving new koans or achieving insights their teachers acknowledged, Ichi remained stuck with his unsolved puzzle. He watched younger monks arrive and eventually surpass him in status and recognition. 55 years, he would whisper while stirring soup. 55 years, and still I cannot hear what one hand sounds like when it claps. The question haunted him through every chore, every quiet moment, every season of his long service. Now, as his body grew frail, Ichi knew his time was approaching its end. He had been moved to a small attic room where he could rest away from daily bustle. As he lay there, in the gathering twilight of his life, something unexpected began to happen. Gradually, the familiar weight of striving began to lift from his chest. The desperate need to solve his koan, the shame of perceived failure, the constant reaching for enlightenment, all of it slowly dissolved like mist at sunrise. Gone was the fierce desire for awakening that had driven him for decades. In place of all that seeking, Ichi discovered something he had never expected, a profound peace that seemed to cradle his entire being. The soft darkness felt not like defeat, but like the gentlest embrace. His breathing slowed, and with it, the churning of thoughts that had occupied his mind for so many years. It was in this exquisite silence, when there remained no more questions nor need for answers, when even the need for breathing seemed to fade into quiet acceptance, that Ichi finally heard it. The whooshing silence of one hand clapping filled his awareness, not as a sound, but as the very nature of existence itself, the sound that had been present all along beneath all the noise of seeking. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Cease to cherish opinions, and you will achieve enlightenment." Here we discover that enlightenment isn't something we attain through effort, but something we uncover when the effort finally ceases. Why do we struggle so intensely with the very seeking that prevents us from finding what we seek? The mind creates a fundamental split between the seeker and the sought, keeping us perpetually reaching for something we imagine exists elsewhere, in some future moment when we'll finally get it. Ichi's story illuminates what Zen calls beginner's mind, the fresh awareness that exists before we complicate it with goals and achievements. For 55 years, he had sophisticated simple presence into complex spiritual ambition. The more expertly he sought enlightenment, the further he moved from the naturally enlightened awareness that had been with him all along. Consider how often we create this pattern. We complicate natural joy with the pursuit of happiness. We obscure natural love with the search for perfect relationships. We cover natural wisdom with endless accumulation of knowledge. Ichi's realization came not through solving his koan, but through finally letting go of the need to solve it. The sound of one hand clapping isn't a riddle to be figured out, but an invitation to rest in the space before thinking begins. The awareness that exists prior to questions and answers. Tonight, as thoughts about your own spiritual journey arise, remember Ichi's profound discovery. What if the very awareness that notices your seeking is the enlightenment you've been seeking? The sound of one hand clapping might be closer than you think, in the very listening that hears all sounds, including silence. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Sometimes the greatest achievement is the willingness to stop achieving and simply rest in what has always been present. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising two fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable Sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here." The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man. I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these 2 very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense. He insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up two fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with two eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment. The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up three fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the two of us, there were only 3 eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners. The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how two people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our two monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. As our time together draws to a quiet end, take a moment to notice the stillness that has settled over you. This profound calm is not a destination we have arrived at, but a space within you that has been uncovered. Can you feel how the lessons from tonight's tales are not just ideas, but a felt sense of clarity and ease available to you right now in the simple rhythm of your own breath? The Buddha taught, "Even as a solid rock is unshaken by the wind, so are the wise unshaken by praise or blame." Tonight, you have learned to be that rock. The stories we've shared were not merely entertainment. They were invitations to find your own unshakable center. They showed that true strength isn't found in resisting the winds of life, the worries, the plans, the memories, but in being so grounded in the present that they simply blow past you without disturbance. This deep inner stability is your natural state. Each narrative was a key, unlocking a deeper understanding that peace is the simple act of letting go. You've seen how attachment to outcomes creates tension, and how releasing that grip brings immediate relief. This wisdom is not something you need to strive for. It has already taken root within your awareness, like a seed planted in fertile ground. Even if your mind wanders, or the noise of the world returns tomorrow, this foundation of calm remains. You have reinforced it here tonight, and you can always return to it. Now, as you prepare for deep and restorative rest, allow this feeling of groundedness to anchor you completely. Let the day's events, the praise and the blame, dissolve into the background. There is nothing left to solve, nothing to figure out. There is only the gentle weight of your body, the soft cadence of your breath, and the profound quiet of this moment. You have practiced the art of being present, and now that presence will guide you effortlessly into sleep. Carry this feeling of unshakable peace with you. It is a quiet confidence that will support you through whatever tomorrow may bring. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.